Before this begins, remember, humanity does not always show power with weapons. Sometimes the scariest thing humans do is stay calm, while everyone else underestimates them.
The first warning did not come from a weapon, a broadcast, or a fleet crossing the border. It came from a human ambassador tapping two fingers against a stone table while every sensor buried beneath Orith Prime briefly forgot how to read the dark. For 3 seconds, the sanctuary station registered mass where no mass should have existed, pressure where empty space should have been clean, and a gravitational shadow large enough to make the defense grid blink awake before shutting itself down again as if embarrassed by its own fear. No one in the Crystal Hall noticed except Analyst Teren Vale. That was what frightened him most. The ceremony continued with perfect elegance. 17 coalition banners shimmered above the delegates. The ancient moon below turned slowly beneath the glass dome, dead and storm-veined, reflecting silver light across faces trained to hide suspicion behind diplomacy. Ambassador Elara Thorne stood at the center of the chamber, calm, composed, almost gentle, accepting humanity's provisional seat with the grace of a species that had waited patiently for permission to belong. Her voice never trembled. Her hands never tightened. Her smile carried gratitude without desperation. But when the hidden defense grid stirred beneath the floor, every human in the room had reacted. Not visibly. Not enough for accusation. Just enough for Teren. A shoulder settling half a breath too early. A naval attaché pausing before lifting his glass. A cultural liaison named Jonah Mercer glancing, not toward the ceiling where the alarms would have sounded, but toward the western aperture where space stretched black beyond Orith Prime's shield. They did not look surprised. They looked confirmed. Teren had spent 34 years studying the difference between fear and readiness. Most species revealed themselves when threatened. Predators expanded. Prey contracted. Liars overcorrected. Soldiers searched for exits. Diplomats searched for witnesses. Humans, he realized with a slow tightening in his chest, did something far more unsettling. They became still. The coalition had invited Earth to Orith Prime believing humanity was young, promising, emotionally volatile, and strategically limited by its own moral hesitation. Their file described humans as cooperative, adaptable, unusually empathetic, and burdened by a violent past they now seemed determined to outgrow. Nothing in the official record mentioned what Teren had just seen. Nothing explained why a species supposedly seeking protection would behave as though protection had already arrived. By the time the applause began, the anomalous reading had vanished from every public channel. By midnight, Teren found it buried in a maintenance log labeled probable lensing artifact. And by 2:13 sanctuary time, when he matched the timestamp to Ambassador Thorne's two quiet fingers against the table, he understood the terrifying shape of the question. What had humanity brought to Orith Prime that even the Coalition's oldest sensors were not supposed to see? Teren did not send the report. He wrote it twice, deleted it once, restored it from the archive buffer, and then sat in the blue glow of his private workstation while the sanctuary's artificial night hummed around him with the softness of a place designed to make powerful beings feel safe. The report contained no accusation. He had been careful about that. It stated only what could be proven: a synchronized human reaction during the welcome ceremony, a 3-second deep field mass echo, a defense grid microactivation suppressed by automatic protocol, and an unexplained match between the anomaly and Ambassador Thorne's hand signal. It was the kind of document that should have moved cleanly through security channels, gathered comments from Sensor Command, reached the Defense Review Board before first light, and then either become a crisis or a footnote. Instead, Teren kept staring at the send command as if it were a trap built for him alone. The problem was not evidence. The problem was meaning. If he filed the report and he was wrong, he would stain humanity's provisional entry with suspicion at the exact moment when the Coalition most needed new allies. If he filed it and he was right, then the Coalition had just welcomed a species that could place something massive beyond its oldest sanctuary without detection. Both possibilities were dangerous. One damaged trust. The other proved trust had already been outmaneuvered. He stood, crossed the archive chamber, and opened the restricted sensor history manually. The system objected with 3 soft warning tones. Teren overrode them using his review authority and watched the last 6 cycles of Orith Prime's outer readings unfold across the curved wall. Nothing appeared at first except the expected shape of emptiness, distant debris, shield distortion, background radiation, the weak gravitational pulse of the dead moon below. He widened the spectrum, then widened it again. The wall filled with numbers so faint most analysts would have dismissed them as noise. But Teren had built his career on noise. There were gaps. They were not large. That was the genius of them. No obvious blank spaces, no crude erasures, no dramatic sensor failures that would invite investigation. Instead, there were tiny moments where the sanctuary's instruments had chosen certainty too quickly. A gravitational ripple resolved as shield bounce. A thermal shadow classified as relay drift. A communications delay folded into routine correction. Each one harmless alone. Each one explainable. Together, they formed a loose ring around Orith Prime, not close enough to threaten the station, not far enough to be irrelevant. Teren magnified the ring until the map trembled with ghost points. Something had been sitting around the sanctuary for at least 9 days. His first emotional response was anger, which surprised him by how cleanly it arrived. Not fear. Not admiration. Anger. Orith Prime was not merely a diplomatic site. It was neutral ground older than several member civilizations. Weapons were forbidden within its sanctuary radius. Fleets stayed beyond the outer treaty line. Even enemies entered beneath the promise that no war would follow them through the door. If humanity had brought hidden ships inside that perimeter, then they had violated the oldest rule the coalition still believed in. Yet even as the anger rose, a second realization chilled it. If the ghost points were human, why had they done nothing? For 9 days, they had remained silent. No targeting locks. No intercepted traffic. No pressure against the shields. No move toward the station. They had not behaved like invaders. They had behaved like watchers. More specifically, they had behaved like protectors who did not want the people being protected to know protection was needed. Teren did not like that thought, because it changed the shape of the room. He pulled the ceremony schedule again. Humanity's welcome had been planned months earlier, but the final defense review had been moved forward at the request of the Rhal Dominion after 3 border colonies disappeared along the outer trade band. The official explanation was piracy. Everyone knew that was polite nonsense. The Rhal did not suffer piracy. They administered it when useful, blamed it when convenient, and erased witnesses when neither option served. Their delegation had arrived at Orith Prime with polished grief and too many warships parked just beyond the legal boundary. Teren shifted his search. Rhal fleet telemetry was sealed under diplomatic privilege, but privilege had edges, and edges always leaked. He found docking fuel estimates, courier launch windows, encrypted traffic density, minor course corrections reported by neutral navigation buoys. Slowly, reluctantly, the pattern assembled itself. The Rhal had not come merely to object to humanity's entry. They had come positioned for escalation. Their vessels beyond the treaty line were arranged in a crescent, not a defensive formation but a containment shape. If the coalition vote had failed, humanity would have left embarrassed. If the vote had passed, as it had, the Rhal were prepared to create an incident. A small one, perhaps. A shuttle malfunction. A shield breach blamed on human interference. A dead aid. A frightened station. Enough confusion to suspend humanity's acceptance and justify emergency military oversight. Teren read the analysis 3 times, hoping it would become less clear. It did not. The humans had known.
Teren has found hidden ghost points, strange sensor gaps, and Rhal ships positioned for a trap. Humanity was not surprised. They already knew danger was coming.
That was why they had been still during the ceremony. Not because they were hiding aggression. Because they were waiting to see whether the Rhal would move first. At dawn, Sareth found him in the archive chamber with 6 projection layers open and his untouched morning ration cooling beside his elbow. She did not ask permission to enter. Sareth had never believed doors were arguments worth respecting when truth was on the other side. She was old enough to have negotiated ceasefires before Teren entered the academy, narrow enough to look fragile until she spoke, and severe in the way of someone who had survived politics by never mistaking politeness for safety. "You look like a man who has learned something inconvenient," she said. "I found an anomaly." That is the word analysts use when they are afraid of the word evidence. He looked at her then, and for the first time since midnight allowed someone else to see the fear under his discipline. Sarat's expression changed by almost nothing, which from her was tenderness. He showed her the ring. She listened without interruption as he explained the ceremony signal, the buried mass echo, the ghost points, the Rhal containment formation, and the likely incident window. He expected her to challenge the conclusion. Instead, she walked closer to the projection and studied the emptiness around Orith Prime with the stillness of a person staring at a predator's tracks in fresh snow. "How many?" she asked. "I cannot confirm objects. Only disturbances." "How many disturbances?" 41 consistent patterns. Possibly more if the lower band distortions are deliberate masking. Sarat exhaled slowly through the side vents of her throat. Humanity claimed 13 escort vessels in its disclosed delegation perimeter. "They may have told the truth," Teren said. "These may not be escort vessels." She turned to him sharply. "Do not soften this because you like them." "I am not softening it. I am making it worse." That stopped her. Teren expanded one of the ghost points and overlaid it with human historical doctrine, not modern fleet design but older patterns from eras before spaceflight. Ambush defense. Civilian evacuation screens. Silent perimeter denial. Decoy retreats. The terms looked primitive until they were not. Humanity had carried ancient survival logic into the stars and dressed it in technology no coalition sensor had been taught to fear. Where other species built war around visibility, hierarchy, and formal escalation, humans built around uncertainty. Not chaos. Uncertainty. The deliberate control of what an enemy was allowed to know. Sarat's voice lowered. "If the Rhal move, what will humans do?" Teren looked at the ring around Orith Prime. "That depends on what the ring is for." The answer arrived before noon. It came through a children's choir. The summit's second day opened with cultural offerings, the harmless theater every coalition accession ceremony required before the crueler questions began. The Keelers sang mathematics through crystal reeds. The Vesh displayed memory silk woven with scenes from their migration storms. Humanity's contribution seemed almost too modest, 24 children from Earth's lunar academies appearing by remote projection to sing an old song about coming home across dark water. Their voices were imperfect in the way children's voices were supposed to be, brave and slightly uneven, filling the crystal hall with a softness that made several delegates shift uncomfortably because tenderness was harder to categorize than power. Teren stood at the rear beside Sarat, watching the human delegation instead of the projection. Ambassador Thorne had one hand folded over the other. Jonah Mercer stood 2 paces behind her, expression open, eyes bright with something that looked like homesickness. Nothing about them suggested danger. That was becoming the most dangerous thing about them. Halfway through the song, Orith Prime's eastern shield registered a maintenance fault. It was tiny, harmless, almost elegant. Then Teren saw Jonah Mercer stop breathing. Across the chamber, the Rhal ambassador lowered his ceremonial cup without drinking. The children kept singing. On Teren's tablet, a sealed emergency channel opened by itself, not from Coalition Command, not from Sanctuary Defense, but from an unknown human relay already inside the system. It contained only 7 words, translated perfectly into his language. "Analyst Vale, please move the children offline." Teren's blood went cold because the message was not a warning to the Coalition. It was proof that humanity knew his name. Teren should have obeyed the message immediately, but obedience required trust, and trust had become the most dangerous currency on Orith Prime. For one suspended second, he stood at the rear of the crystal hall with the children's song floating above the assembly, watching a human warning glow on his tablet while the Rhal ambassador sat perfectly still beneath the banners, his ceremonial cup untouched, his eyes lowered in the exact posture of innocence. Everything in the chamber remained beautiful. That was what made it feel obscene. The crystal reeds from the previous offering still chimed faintly in the air. The dead moon below turned in patient silence. 24 human children sang about crossing darkness toward a lighted shore, unaware that someone had chosen their voices as the moment to begin a war. Sareth saw his face and moved closer without looking at the tablet. What happened? Teren did not answer her first. He looked at Jonah Mercer. The human liaison was still behind Ambassador Thorne, still wearing the formal calm expected of him, but the mask had thinned. His gaze was not on Teren now. It was on the eastern shield aperture where nothing visible had changed. That was the detail that settled the argument inside Teren. Mercer was not asking for help because humanity lacked control. He was asking because the next move had to come from the coalition, or whatever happened afterward would look like human aggression. Teren opened the cultural relay controls and entered his authority code. The system rejected it. For the first time since he had joined the Sanctuary Service, Orith Prime told him he did not have permission to protect guests inside its own hull. The rejection flashed once, then buried itself beneath a false maintenance overlay. Teren felt something colder than fear move through him. This was not merely a Rhal provocation waiting outside the shields. Someone had reached into the sanctuary itself. Someone had planned this carefully enough to lock out the analyst most likely to notice. The children, he said quietly. They are the incident. Sareth's face hardened. Explain. I cannot. Not yet. That was not enough for her, but the room gave him no time to earn her patience. The children's projection flickered, only once, a soft distortion across their faces. Most delegates interpreted it as a transmission artifact. Teren saw the Rhal ambassador's lower hand vanish beneath the edge of his robe. Jonah Mercer saw it too. So did Ambassador Thorne, though she did not turn. Instead, she lifted her chin by the smallest degree, and every human in the delegation became still in the same terrible way they had during the welcome ceremony. Teren understood then that he was standing inside a weaponized silence. He bypassed the relay panel and moved directly into the emergency architecture, using a maintenance access route he had once reported as a vulnerability and then quietly memorized when command failed to repair it. The system fought him with delays, polite warnings, and false confirmations. He stripped each away while the song continued, while the children reached the final verse, while the Rhal ambassador finally raised his cup and smiled at no one. Then the eastern shield failed. It did not collapse dramatically. It opened like an eyelid. A needle of directed energy entered Orith Prime through a gap no wider than a service corridor, too narrow to trigger the main alarms, too precise to be accidental. It crossed the outer observatory, struck the cultural relay spine, and turned the children's projection into a burst of white static. The choir vanished mid-note. The hall inhaled as one body. For half a breath there was no sound at all, only the ghost of children's voices cut off before the final word. Then the Rhal ambassador stood. His grief arrived faster than information could have. The humans have attacked their own transmission, he declared, his translator pushing shock into every language at once. They have staged an atrocity inside neutral ground to force military privilege. It was too prepared, too perfect. The accusation reached the room before the fear could organize itself. Several delegations recoiled from the human side of the chamber. Sanctuary guards moved toward Ambassador Thorne. Emergency lights bloomed under the crystal floor, soft gold turning to red. Teren's tablet finally released the relay logs, but the evidence came wrapped in corruption, signatures scrambled, origin points folded through 3 false human channels. Whoever had designed the strike had not meant to kill children. The children had never been physically present. That was the elegance of the cruelty. The goal was emotional detonation, not blood. A dead child becomes a martyr. A vanished child becomes doubt. Ambassador Thorne did not defend herself. That, more than the Rhal accusation, terrified the chamber into silence. She simply turned toward the empty projection field, her face pale but unbroken, and placed 2 fingers against the stone rail before her. Not the same rhythm as before. Slower. Heavier. A signal meant not for the room but for something listening beyond it. The sanctuary defense grid woke fully. Every old weapon hidden inside Orith Prime's treaty architecture unfolded from sleep, not aiming outward at the Rhal fleet, but inward at the human delegation. The public gasps began then. The coalition had built its sanctuary to restrain any guest who violated neutrality, and the corrupted relay logs had just told it that humanity had done exactly that. Teren watched targeting halos form around Ambassador Thorne, Jonah Mercer, the naval officers, even the silent medical aide who had done nothing but hold a folded coat since morning. Jonah Mercer finally looked at Teren. There was no accusation in his expression. No panic. Only a question that felt worse than both. Can you see it now? Teren did. The true attack was not the shield breach. It was the force choice. If humanity defended itself, every weapon on Orith Prime would fire. If humanity did nothing, the Rhal narrative would harden before the coalition could examine it. If the hidden ring outside revealed itself, the Rhal would claim proof of premeditated human militarization. Humanity had been maneuvered into a cage built from law, optics, and restraint. And still, the humans had not moved. That restraint changed the room more than any protest could have. Teren saw delegates who had recoiled begin to hesitate. He saw Saret's old eyes narrow, not at the humans but at the timing of the Rhal ambassador's outrage. He saw Councillor Vey of the Keeler review his own feed with trembling hands. Doubt was not acquittal, but it was oxygen, and the Rhal had meant to deny humanity even that. Teren made his decision. He stepped into the center aisle before Saret could stop him and transmitted his private archive overlay directly to the chamber wall. Unauthorized data exploded across the ceremonial banners: the 9-day ghost ring, the Rhal containment formation beyond the treaty line, the false maintenance lockout, the Eastern Shield microgap, the corrupted relay path, and the impossible timing of the Rhal accusation. The hall turned on him with the collective shock of a machine struck by lightning. This evidence is unverified, the Rhal ambassador snapped. Yes, Teren said, his voice amplified by the emergency channel before he had meant it to be. That is why you tried to make us act before we could verify it. The accusation landed harder because it came from him, not from a human. He was coalition-born, sanctuary-cleared, professionally cautious to the point of irritation. He had no reason to protect Earth except the most dangerous reason of all. The evidence demanded it. The Rhal ambassador's sorrow vanished. For the first time, Teren saw what lived underneath the polish. Not anger. Calculation under pressure. The look of a creature discovering that one part of its trap had learned to speak. Then Orith Prime's external sensors screamed. The Rhal fleet crossed the treaty line. Not one ship. Not a panicked escort. 40 heavy vessels burned inward from the legal boundary in a crescent formation, weapons waking behind diplomatic codes, engines hot enough to paint the sanctuary sky with blue-white fire. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted over translators. The defense grid split its targeting priorities between the human delegation and the incoming fleet, confused by conflicting definitions of threat. The Rhal ambassador turned toward the glass dome with theatrical horror, already preparing his second lie. But he never got to speak it. The stars behind the Rhal fleet went out. At first Teren thought the sanctuary glass had darkened. Then the sensor wall resolved the shape, and every voice in the chamber died at once. The ghost ring around Orith Prime had not been made of ships in the way the coalition understood ships. The 41 disturbances unfolded into a single distributed architecture, vast and patient, sections separating from background radiation like predators lifting their heads from tall grass. Human vessels were there, yes, but they were only the visible bones of something larger: sensor mirrors, cold drive anchors, silent drone lattices, gravitational dampers, and relay shadows arranged around the sanctuary in a pattern too precise to be improvised and too restrained to be conquest. Humanity had not brought a fleet to threaten Orith Prime. Humanity had built a shield around it before anyone knew there was danger.
The Rhal tried to frame humanity, but the truth is bigger. Humans were not threatening Orith Prime. They were protecting it before anyone even understood the danger. Orith Prime learned the truth. Human silence is not weakness. Humanity protected those who doubted them and proved that real strength is discipline, patience, and courage.
The
The
incoming
present
Rhal crescent struck the invisible boundary of that shield and stopped as if space itself had refused them permission. No explosion followed. No heroic charge. No blazing human counterattack. 40 Rhal warships hung frozen beyond the sanctuary radius, engines screaming, weapons armed, every violent intention preserved in perfect public view and denied the dignity of impact. Only then did Ambassador Thorne speak. Her voice entered every channel at once, calm enough to shame the alarms around her. Orith Prime remains neutral ground. Humanity recognizes that neutrality. Humanity has protected it. Humanity now requests that the Coalition review the complete record before anyone else attempts to murder children for a better headline. The chamber did not breathe. On Teren's tablet, the unknown human relay sent one final message. Thank you, Analyst Vale. Now please look behind the Rhal fleet. Teren looked behind the Rhal fleet and understood why humanity had waited. Beyond the frozen crescent of warships, beyond the invisible boundary that held 40 armed vessels in perfect humiliation, another darkness moved. At first it seemed like the natural absence between stars, the kind of emptiness every spacefaring species learned to ignore because nothing useful could be done with it. Then the sanctuary sensors widened under human permission, peeling back layers of false background, gravitational haze, and delayed light until the emptiness became shape. Not a fleet. Not a station. Not anything the Coalition's military vocabulary could comfortably name. It was a moving wound in space, wide enough to swallow the Rhal formation whole, surrounded by thousands of tiny drive signatures that flickered and vanished like insects around a corpse. Sarat whispered a word from a language older than the Council itself. The translator did not attempt to render it. The Rhal ambassador stopped pretending. His face lost its ceremonial grief, then its outrage, then the final bright fragments of confidence that had carried him into the chamber. For one instant, he looked not like a statesman or an enemy, but like a messenger who had delivered the wrong lie to the wrong room and now saw the real truth arriving behind him. Teren watched that fear spread through the Rhal delegation in uneven waves. One aide reached for a private transmitter. Another simply sat down. Their warships remained locked outside the sanctuary radius, helpless, while the darkness behind them continued to grow. Ambassador Thorne did not turn to enjoy their terror. She looked at the Coalition delegates instead. The Rhal colonies did not disappear because of pirates, she said. They disappeared because something has been following their expansion routes for 9 months. The chamber remained silent, but the silence had changed. It was no longer accusation. It was dependence forming in real time. Jonah Mercer stepped forward and opened his hands, projecting archived fragments into the air above the stone table. Broken distress signals. Evacuated mining habitats. Rhal military reports stripped of official seals. Children's drawings recovered from a dead colony school, each one showing the same impossible black shape above a red horizon. The Rhal had hidden the losses, blamed raiders, and used the fear to justify military expansion toward Coalition territory. Humanity had found the pattern after one human relief ship answered a distress call no one else had taken seriously. We tracked it quietly, Mercer said, and for the first time since Teren had met him, the charm was gone from his voice. Because panic would have fed it more targets. The darkness opened. Not physically, not like a mouth, though every ancient instinct in the hall wanted to call it that. A pulse spread from its center, bending light around the Rhal fleet and pressing against humanity's silent shield hard enough to make the crystal dome sing. Several delegates cried out as the floor trembled beneath them. Orith Prime's old weapons rotated outward at last, but they looked suddenly ceremonial, beautiful relics pointed at a storm that did not understand ceremony. The Rhal ambassador found his voice again, but it came out smaller. You knew this was coming. Yes, Thorne said. And you brought it here. No, she replied. You did. The complete record appeared then, released not by humanity but by Teren's own unauthorized channel, now carrying every hidden file Mercer had quietly fed into Coalition systems the moment Teren chose truth over protocol. Rhal containment plans. Fabricated relay signatures. Orders to create a false human atrocity. Suppressed colony losses. And beneath all of it, the final horror, Rhal Command had discovered the pursuing entity weeks earlier and chosen Orith Prime as bait, believing the Sanctuary's shields, coalition delegates, and newly admitted humans would slow the thing long enough for the Rhal fleet to study it from a safe distance. They had not come to frame humanity alone. They had come to sacrifice everyone. The chamber broke then, not into panic, but into something worse for the Rhal, understanding. Every delegate knew what it meant to be used as a shield by someone smiling beside them. Every old rivalry, every suspicion of humanity, every careful diplomatic hesitation suddenly reorganized around a clearer enemy. Sarat stepped into the central aisle beside Teren, her narrow frame rigid with fury, and spoke the emergency words that had not been invoked in 2 centuries. Sanctuary authority transfers to collective survival command. The treaty architecture accepted her voice. Orith Prime changed allegiance from procedure to life. Every targeting halo around the human delegation vanished. Ambassador Thorne closed her eyes for one brief second, and Teren realized she had not known whether the coalition would choose quickly enough. Humanity had prepared for betrayal, for attack, for misunderstanding, but still they had left one space open for trust. Not because they were naive. Because if trust had no space to exist, then survival would become only a longer form of loneliness. When Thorne opened her eyes, the humans moved. The ghost architecture around Orith Prime unfolded fully. Cold drive anchors flared with controlled blue gravity. Drone lattices rotated into geometric patterns older than human cities and newer than coalition science. Silent vessels slid from darkness, not grand or decorative like the fleets of ancient empires, but lean, purposeful, almost severe. They did not resemble conquest. They resembled tools built by people who hated needing them and had therefore built them perfectly. The entity struck the shield again. This time humanity answered. Not with a single blast, not with the theatrical violence the coalition expected from war, but with layered intelligence. The drone lattices split the entity's pulse into harmless fragments. Gravitational dampers pulled its mass shadow away from the sanctuary. Human ships fired not at the darkness itself, but at the flickering swarm around it, severing the tiny drive signatures that served as its eyes, scouts, and teeth. Every move was coordinated without visible command. Every correction anticipated a counterstrike before it arrived. It was not a battle in the coalition sense. It was diagnosis performed at the speed of war. Teren watched or replace fear across the chamber. The humans were not stronger because they were louder. They were stronger because they had studied terror without worshipping it. They had built defenses that protected even those who doubted them. They had hidden power not to dominate the room, but to keep the room alive long enough to understand. And when violence finally came, humanity did not become monstrous. Humanity became precise. The entity recoiled. For the first time, the impossible darkness behaved like something that could learn pain. Its outer swarm collapsed inward. The main mass folded around itself, trying to slip between sensor layers, but the human net tightened with patient cruelty. Teren saw the ancient logic then, the old human inheritance Mercer had never said aloud. This was not predator strength. This was prey memory sharpened into strategy. The species that had once survived in forests by listening for teeth in the dark had carried that listening across the stars and turned it into a shield large enough to cover worlds. The final move came from the children. Their projection returned suddenly above the table, not as a song but as 24 live faces watching from a secure lunar relay, alive, frightened, and brave enough to stay visible. One child, a small girl with dark curls and a trembling chin, raised a hand because someone off-screen had told her she could. Her voice entered the chamber softly. "Ambassador Thorne, are we still singing?" No weapon in the sanctuary could have struck harder. Thorne's composure fractured. Only slightly. Only enough to prove there was a human being beneath the diplomatic steel. "Not yet," she said, her voice roughened by one honest edge. "Wait for the quiet." The human net closed. Space beyond Orith Prime flashed without fire. The entity's swarm vanished first, each tiny signature extinguished in perfect sequence. Then the great darkness convulsed as the gravitational dampers inverted, not crushing it but pulling it apart along the hidden seams humanity had spent 9 months mapping. It tried to flee toward the Rhal formation, toward the easy violence that had summoned it, but the frozen warships blocked its path like evidence preserved for judgment. One final pulse shook the dome, ringing through crystal, stone, bone, and breath. Then the dark broke. It did not explode. It unraveled into harmless dust and scattered light, spreading across the shield in a pale wave that made the dead moon below shine as if dawn had returned to a world that had forgotten it was allowed to glow. For several seconds, no one spoke. The Rhal fleet hung powerless beyond the treaty line. The human vessels remained in position, still silent, still disciplined, still refusing to turn victory into performance. Then, from the restored projection, the children began to sing. This time nobody shifted uncomfortably. Nobody dismissed tenderness as weakness. The song moved through the crystal hall, uneven and brave, about dark water, distant lights, and finding the way home. One by one, delegates lowered their heads. Sarek closed both hands around the rail. Teren felt something loosen in his chest that he had not known had been locked there since the first anomaly. Ambassador Thorne turned toward the coalition. Humanity requests full disclosure review, she said. Rhal Command should answer for its crimes. The sanctuary should remain neutral. And those children should be allowed to finish their song. No one objected. Not because they feared humanity, though some did now. Not because they fully understood humanity, because none of them did. They agreed because the evidence was undeniable, because the sanctuary was still standing, because the children were alive, and because the youngest species in the room had done what the oldest powers had failed to do. Humanity had arrived seeking a seat, discovered a trap, shielded its judges, exposed its enemy, and defeated a nightmare without ever forgetting who it was protecting. Teren finally sent his report. He added only one line before submitting it to the permanent record. Humanity's silence should not be mistaken for uncertainty. 6 cycles later, Earth received full coalition membership by unanimous emergency vote. The official classification took the translation office 4 days to complete and still failed to satisfy anyone. Strategic protector was too simple. Silent power was too poetic. Civilizational deterrent was too cold. In the end, the record used a phrase from Counselor Saret's testimony, a species that prepares for war so peace has somewhere to stand. Jonah Mercer found Teren afterward beneath the repaired crystal dome, where the storm-veined moon glowed faintly with leftover light. "You noticed the tap," Mercer said. "You wanted me to." Mercer smiled, tired this time. "We hoped you would." Teren looked out at the stars where the human shield had already faded back into darkness. "And if I had not?" Mercer's smile disappeared, but not into threat. Into honesty. "Then we would still have protected the sanctuary." That answer stayed with Teren longer than the battle, longer than the vote, longer even than the children's song. Because it was then he understood the part of humanity the coalition had almost missed. Their strength was not that they could destroy what threatened them. Many species could destroy. Humanity's strength was that it could be insulted, doubted, framed, and targeted, and still choose to place its shield between danger and those who had not yet learned to trust it. Outside Orith Prime, the stars returned to their ordinary brightness. Somewhere beyond them, human vessels waited in silence, not because they desired war, but because they remembered what happened when no one was ready. The galaxy would argue about humanity for centuries. It would question their methods, fear their patience, study their impossible machines, and tell younger species the story of the day Earth entered the coalition under suspicion and left as the reason the coalition survived. But no one in that crystal hall ever again called human silence weakness.
Orith Prime learned the truth. Human silence is not weakness. Humanity protected those who doubted them and proved that real strength is discipline, patience, and courage.